Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm Shelby. I'm the ministry assistant at Cambridge City Christian Church, and this is Danny. And we're back.
We are back, yes. Back and better than ever.
Yeah. Sure.
After Christmas, right? Did you have a
Yeah.
good Christmas?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it was busy as usual.
Yes.
And then now here the last 2 weeks, Christmas brought us cold.
Yes.
So cold.
Yeah.
This
I
morning.
like the snow. I don't like the super cold.
Yeah, it said this morning and my thermometer was -9 at my house.
Yeah, that's awful.
Ugh, that's horrible. But
That doesn't even seem real.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's awful.
That's like supposed to be well, yesterday, the wind was just whipping across the field
Mm-hmm.
behind our house. I mean, it looked like a scene from like up in the Arctic or
Mhm.
something. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, when the kids were coming out of school yesterday, it was kind of scary.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
they're going to blow away.
Yeah. It was pretty freaky. But yeah, so it's good to be
It's gonna
back.
get colder.
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah.
Well, it is
So-
January, so that's what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, the depressing part's over.
That's right. Yeah. Now we'll get into the good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
we're doing the story.
Yeah.
We did chapter 13 this week.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Solomon.
Yep, we got into Solomon, and Solomon is an interesting guy. So, of course, David, we talked about him last week, and David was a man who loved God, but made a lot of bad decisions, and those decisions
Seems
ended
like
up.
Solomon kind of did the same thing.
He did, but in a different way, right? Like David's was a lot of personal type of failings. He had a man killed because he wanted to marry his wife, and and then there were just other things that happened. He didn't raise his kids all that great, and a couple of them rebelled against him, and a couple of them ended up dying, and he had one stepson that raped another daughter. I mean, it was just one thing after another in his house. And obviously he loved God, and there was no question about that. He admitted his wrongs when he did wrongs, but with bad decisions come consequences. And that's kind of where we kind of find ourselves coming into Solomon's life. Now, Solomon was wise. When God asked him what he wanted, he didn't ask for riches or anything. He asked for wisdom. So he was wise. He was world renowned for being wise.
The wisest.
The
they
wisest,
say, right?
yeah. People leaders from all over the known world at that time would come and see him. His kingdom was the largest that Israel ever had. It kind of went down almost to Egypt, up into Lebanon, over towards Syria. Maybe even some places of like in modern day Iraq. So I mean, it was a big kingdom and very wealthy. He had a lot of money and a lot of power. But while he was wise, it seems like he started off well and he ended off not so good. And a lot of that had to do with influences in his life, being the 700 wives. What do you think about that, Shelby?
That's way too many.
It's 699 too many, according
Some
to
would
the
say
Bible.
700 too many.
Well, I guess it depends on the guy, right?
And 300 concubines.
Concubines.
I had to Google that.
Yeah, okay. So what'd you find out?
It's a woman or I guess it could be a man too, that lives with you and
Yeah.
you sleep with, but you're
Yeah.
not married.
Right. It's kind of like a live-in boyfriend or girl.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that was a common thing. And you have to remember, a lot of these marriages were political marriages. It's very possible that he didn't even know
That's so
90% of his wives or even his concubines. So, I mean, because he just married it for
How do you
political
keep
reasons.
track of people like that?
I don't know, some database, but they didn't have a
I
computer.
was gonna say you couldn't make an Excel sheet. You could put it in your tablets.
Yeah, you had to have somebody just write it on the parchment, or they didn't. I don't. At that period of time, they had like parchment and stuff. It wasn't like tablets like you see on Flintstones or something. All right, but they yeah, it was
You have to wear
crazy.
name tags.
Yeah, name tags and your wife ID number, under it. So, yeah, it was a pretty crazy thing. But anyway, all those influences affected him, and he drifted from God.
Because they were all different.
Yeah, almost all of
religions and
them were
stuff.
from other areas, people groups that God had told him and really the nation as a whole not to intermarry with. So yeah, he made a lot of mistakes. So that kind of brings us a little bit a good summary. I mean, at the beginning of his kingdom, he built the temple, did some really good things, but by the end, he struggled. Now, there's a lot of debate as to whether he turned his life around at the end. Maybe, because when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, which is kind of his diary in a way, you kind of get this sense at the end of the book that he comes to the realization that the most important thing to do in life is to obey God.
Yeah.
So some people have seen that as a sign that he turned his life around at the end. Maybe that's possible, but very interesting life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something we didn't talk about on Sunday, just that I thought of real quick, was when he built the temple.
Yeah.
And then they had like that dedication ceremony. And one of the questions on our paper was like what it would be like to be there.
Yeah.
And it talked about this big prayer he did, and then like
Yeah.
God came down.
Yeah.
I thought that would be really cool
Yeah.
and scary at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, really neat description of what happened. And yeah, I mean, again, you see there that he was a man devoted to God.
Yeah.
I mean, he was raised right in terms of his spiritual walk, because when David named him as king on his deathbed, he knew that Solomon was a man who loved God. But it was later that he kind of drifted away.
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. I have 3 questions.
All right, 3 questions today. I'm ready, I think.
All right. My first one, they all kind of have to do with marriage. I
Okay,
guess.
yeah, and that's really what we
talked a lot
centered the
about marriage
message
this week.
on this week was on marriage. So yeah.
So my first question is, why do you think people who don't live together before marriage have a lower divorce rate?
Yeah, so on Sunday, if you don't know where Shelby's coming up with this question, you can watch the sermon if you weren't there. On Sunday, we talked about there's been multiple secular studies that have come out to show that people who live together before they get married have higher rates of divorce,
Like
which is
75%.
yeah, and that's surprising to a lot of people, because a lot of people, the prevailing thought today is that people that live together, they would have more success with marriage because they already kind of know each other, living together, all that kind of thing. Well, that's not what the statistics say. And so, yeah, I would say from what I've read and what I've seen just anecdotally in people's lives is I think it comes down to trust. I think a reason why some people don't get married at first, they live together, is because they don't want to fully put their marbles, so to say, their trust in with that person. And I think that when they get married, that probably still lingers.
Right.
That would be my best guess.
I kind of wondered if you get to know each other better not living together. Like you have to connect more
Yeah,
emotionally.
that's a good point. I mean, maybe when you through dating or what that you're more looking more into that person's character and integrity and things like that. Yeah, because I mean, today it just seems like people move in with each other pretty quickly in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And the other statistic that was a part of it said that, well, I don't remember the number, but it was a high number. I think it was 50% end up 10 years later they're divorced. Or maybe maybe that was 75. Yeah, it was, or maybe it was 85. It was a really
They're
high
like
number.
not married.
Yeah.
Either they never get married or they.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason that statistic's important, because a lot of people think, well, if we live together, then that must mean that we're really committed. No, it doesn't.
People think of it like a trial run, I think.
Yeah, they do. They see it as a trial run, and again, the statistics show that doesn't mean you're going to have success in your marriage. So right now, the divorce rate is, I think, around 50%. So now that I shared Sunday, a lot of people thought for a long time the divorce rate for Christians and non-Christians was the same, but it's been proven that that's not true. Christians do have a much lower divorce rate than non-Christians, but if you live together before you're married, it's like you mentioned, it's like 75%. So that's almost double, not quite, but it's double the rate for those who live together first. So again, God just said you should be married before you live together. So God's teaching is true.
Yeah.
And we have to rely on it. So yeah, I mean, that would be a couple of guesses. Your guess is a good one. Mine, I think, is a good one. There may be some other things at play, but yeah. Simply put.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My second one, we talked about how we can't marry someone to save them.
Right. Yeah.
So how do we balance loving everyone but not getting too involved with others' sins?
So I think what we have to do in our relationships is we have to think of our relationships in terms of levels. There was a class I taught here a little while back that talked about how we have different friendship levels. So we have like people that are closest to us. That would be a spouse, probably our parents, maybe our siblings would be in that closest circle. Maybe a best friend would be in that closest circle. And then you kind of have like personal people in your life. That would be like friends, people like that. And then you have like your general associates. So maybe people you work with, you go to school with, maybe you're on a ball team with, people that you associate with. And then there's just the general population. And what we have to be very careful of is not, as Christians, is not allowing those who are not followers of Jesus to be within that smallest circle.
Okay.
Now, some people might say, "Well, my parents are Christians, but they're close," and then I think again, Christ would never tell us, "Well, just cut them off." Then that's not what he's saying. But we do sometimes have to put boundaries in place because, like we saw in Solomon's life, these influences pulled him away from God. You mentioned just briefly there in the question that a lot of times we think, oh, we can pull those people to Christ. Sometimes, but usually it's the other way around.
Right.
It will pull you away from Christ. So it's really important to take a look at who is I would say the two closest circles, especially the closest. So you got to be careful with who you marry. You got to be careful who your best friends are, because those are two types of relationships you can choose.
Yeah.
Your parents are your parents. Your siblings are your siblings. But those ones we especially need to be very mindful of. And then I would even say even our friendships, we can have friendships with non-Christians, but we have to put boundaries in place in order to make sure that those influences don't pull us away from Christ. So yeah, that's I don't think we think about this a lot.
No.
I mean, have you ever, I don't think most people sit back and think, okay, these are the different levels of relationships that I have. We tend to let them just all kind of meld together.
I mean, we say like your friend or your best friend, but you
Yeah.
don't think about people being on different levels.
Yeah, and you don't think about what you should share and what you don't share. And I know I had this discussion with this class that I taught before. We talked about this with social media, like what you share, like your most personal, confidential things you share with people in that inner group. Why? Because you trust them. And then you have certain pieces of information you might share with your friends that you wouldn't share with your coworkers or
Right.
or when you're on social media. Anything you put on social media is with the general world.
Right.
So you have
I'll
to
send a message to my best friend that is not something I would put on Facebook.
yes, or at least that's what you should do. Although we see that
That's not
we
always
see those boundaries blown apart. But yeah, it's kind of the similar idea. So
Okay.
yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
And then my last one, how do you pursue a biblical marriage?
So pursuing a biblical marriage. Wow, that we could go on with that one for a little while. Again, I think it starts with what I just mentioned. If you're going to have a biblical marriage, it has to start with who you're married to.
Right.
Them growing closer to Christ, or the two of you together. Jesus talks about being unequally yoked, and it's important to start there, because if you don't start there, then it's much more difficult. Now, if you do start there, then it does involve other things, such as praying together, talking about God in your daily life together, participating in church life together, serving others in the community together. Things like that. I think those are important aspects. I mean, it's really not a whole lot different than what you would do personally. It's just you do it together.
Okay.
So if you're going to have a biblical marriage, it's following Jesus together, is what I would say. Now, I do want to say, I want to put a quick caveat in this. I do know that there are some in our church and churches around that have like a spouse that's not really a Christ follower.
Right.
And I'm not telling them, I'm not sitting here today and say, well, you need to leave them or whatever. That is not at all what you should do.
Right.
Because marriage is important to God, and he hates divorce. He doesn't want that to happen. But even in the marriage, sometimes you might have to put some boundaries in place with that spouse. I mean, and that's hard.
Like marriages and people are different too, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you have some spouses, might be a Christian spouse might be married to the other, and maybe they participate in activity that is not God honoring, they would have to put up a boundary and say, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
So anything that's not God honoring, a good husband or a good wife should not pull you into that. So you do have to put up boundaries in those situations. But don't use God if it's something that's not biblical.
Right.
Like, well, I'm not doing that because I'm a Christian and you're not, when it's not
Right.
something that's biblical.
Yeah.
So just it can be a very, very hard road to navigate.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right.
All right.
That's it for my
I think
questions.
we covered it. Yeah, a lot was going on this week, but it was good.
There was a lot.
It was good. Yeah.
What's this week?
So this week, it was funny. We were in group this Sunday, and we had somebody said, "Okay, I'm starting to figure out what's going on here in the Old Testament." And I said, "Well, I've got bad news. Next week it's going to get rough again because we talk about the divided kingdom of Israel when things go bad, and we look at all of these good kings and bad kings, and Israel just turns into one big hot mess."
Yeah.
Right, and so
it kind of seems like it's been a hot mess the whole time.
well, it has, but at least they only had one king,
Right.
and now it's back to just this mess, and you have two different kingdoms, and eventually it leads to the destruction of both over a couple of 100 years of time. So we're going to jump into that. We're going to look at where our allegiances are, and we're going to look at like our legacy. What does our legacy look like? What are we leaving to our kids, even our grandchildren, or just people who are going to come after us in the church or in our community? So we're going to touch on that a little bit this Sunday. Yeah.
Never really thought about that.
Yeah. So,
Okay. All right. So next week we'll cover chapter 14, and we should be back, right?
Yep.
All right. So we'll see you next week, and we hope you have a great week.